entrepreneur, an investor, and a business strategist. And I am here today because I believe that iron sharpens iron. And when we share what's working in business and maybe even what isn't, what we're able to do is link arms and elevate and grow together. So what does that mean? That means that as we grow personally, professionally in our businesses and our businesses grow, the ripple effect impacts not only ourselves and our family, but our teams, their family, our clients, our communities, and our world. I'm really excited to be here today because I have a very special guest for you in studio. Stephanie Puryear Helling is here, and she spent 25 years in the multifamily real estate world, kind of in a corporate gig, and she has transitioned into entrepreneurship, so she can really bring a whole lot of value from the leadership and that executive function as well as that transition here today. Stephanie, I'm really excited to have you here today. Welcome to the studio.
Jen, thank you so much for having me. I'm honored to be here with you. I love your show, so thank you for having me here to talk with you today.
Absolutely, and we're going to just dive right in because so many times people reach out who watch the show and they may be in a corporate job and side gigging or wanting to go into business for themselves, but they really are held back. They have a fear, they don't know when to take the leap, or they take the leap before they have a plan. And you were forced into a situation where you had to make the leap. So I'd really love to dig into your story and how you transitioned out of corporate and into entrepreneurship.
Sure, absolutely. Thanks for asking. So as you mentioned, I was in multifamily real estate for 25 plus years, and the last company that I worked for 3 companies during that time, I was with for 21 years. Absolutely loved them, thought I could see myself retiring there. I wore many different hats in learning and development and real estate strategic services, and we'd acquired a lot of other companies, which made us the largest global leader in that space. And of course, COVID happened, right? Which was challenging for all of us and so many companies. And during that transition, we were also going through some restructuring as a result of company acquisition, and I was laid off, which was actually a blessing because I'd been thinking about, what do I do next in my career? And several people that I know, some of my mentors had been talking to me about going out on my own for a few years because I'd been speaking on the national circuit for 20. And so it really was the push that I needed. Now, I certainly wouldn't have necessarily chosen to make that leap during a global pandemic, but it did allow me to stretch myself, right? And take that leap and figure out what am I going to do next and how am I going to do it. So I started my company. And
I think that's really interesting. And I want to just kind of highlight that so many people believe that they have job security, and we're facing those similar situations. There's a lot of layoffs happening because of economic reasons. There's a lot of restructuring going on. So a lot of people are stuck in a corporate job thinking, I have job security, but you found that wasn't actually, it was a myth. So I just wanted to highlight that and ask you, when that happened, it was out of the blue. You didn't expect it. We were talking about this before the show.
Yeah.
And so it kind of hit you out of left field. So talk to us about the resilience and during that transition, because you said it's a blessing and we can think about that now, but there's a lot of people facing that exact same scenario today.
Yeah. So, it was unexpected because I knew we were going to do restructuring. I had several conversations with the person that I was reporting to about taking on a very different role that really wasn't the best fit for me. I mean, you and I talked on the phone. I'm a DI, ENFJ. My focus has always been on leading and developing teams and people. And we had a conversation about me taking on a role that was not people-oriented or people-driven. Looking in hindsight, looking back, I had a hand in that, right? Because I didn't want to do what this restructuring was suggesting. But at the end of the day, I was a little bit surprised because I did think, well, surely there will be a different role that's a better fit for me. And that wasn't the case. And I wasn't the only, person that was laid off. We'd gone through 2 rounds of layoffs. And when that happens, it can be devastating because, as you mentioned, people do think they have job security. I loved the people I worked with and for and that company so much. And so it was, difficult to navigate. However, I will share with you that, on that phone call that I received, within about 5 minutes, I told the person I was reporting to, I said, give me 30 seconds, and I paused. And then I got back on the phone and I said, okay, so let's talk about the transition plan, because I wanted to make sure projects and my team and people were taken care of. And she said, I'm amazed at your reaction. And I said, well, what do you mean? She said, well, you're just pivoting. And I said, well, that I'm solution oriented, right? And so once a decision like a layoff is made, that ship has sailed. And, back in 08, 09, when, the banks were going under and many businesses were impacted, particularly multifamily real estate, I had to lay off 3 amazing people on my team. And that was not a decision that we chose lightly. It was not a decision that I really wanted to have to make. And so I'd been there. And I knew in her spot how difficult of a position that is when you have to make a tough choice. Mm-hmm. And so I said, I feel for you and the fact that you're having to have this conversation. So I think the resilience aspect is something that I'm really passionate about helping people with. I've had many life changes in my life over the last few years. One of those alone, like a layoff, right, can set someone back, and you question, your worth and your value and all of those things. And those are natural human emotions to have. But at the end of the day, when something like that happens, we really have 2 choices, right? We can be bitter, or we can use that as an opportunity to move forward and be better. And it doesn't mean stuff down all of the emotions that come up. We are human. You have to feel them. You have to go through that. But then once you've felt it and you've processed it, now you need to take action. And what is that going to be?
I love how you bring that up, because we were speaking a lot about reinventing ourselves. Both of us have reinvented ourselves throughout the course of our proverbial career, whether entrepreneurship, corporate, what have you. And it requires a level of resilience. And entrepreneurship requires a high level of resilience, because let's just take business. Any given day in business, there's going to be challenges. We don't succeed all the time. And I think this is something that's really important to talk about, because the Instagram life, or what we see on social media, is everybody's wins, and nobody really talks about all the failures that we have, all the challenges and the times that we have to pick ourselves up, dust ourselves off, and go, great, that didn't work. What am I going to do differently so I don't repeat this mistake? And that mental resiliency is such a key part of entrepreneurship. And so talk to me a little bit about if people are in these challenging situations. Maybe they thought they had job security and they've been let go. Maybe they are in corporate thinking about making their side gig full-time, or maybe they're in business and they really have a hard time when they get knocked down. What are some ways that people can start to build that mental resilience, that resiliency muscle, so that when the tough stuff happens, they are able to dust themselves off and say, well, great, I'm going to use this, I'm going to learn from this, and I'm going to keep moving forward?
Yeah. Great question. So I think first and foremost, people can have the tendency when something like that happens to beat themselves up, right? What did I do wrong? Where did I fail? How could I have prevented this from happening? And those are good questions to ask, because sometimes perhaps there is something we said or did or didn't do that could have contributed to the outcome of a circumstance, right? And so it's good to ask those questions in a sort of debrief capacity. However, it's really important to look at yourself and know and value your strengths, right? So I'm a huge assessment geek, and you and I shared our results with one another. But I think if you haven't done assessments, or even if you have and it's been a while, it's a great opportunity to maybe look at your results from before, or do it again, because now you've experienced a major life change. And that can really help you take an objective approach and look at who you are, what your natural talents, strengths, and abilities are, and where you may be able to leverage or apply those in a different way than you did before. We've heard about the Great Recession, right? And quiet quitting. And there are so many people out there, which I think the pandemic exacerbated that, right? But there are so many people out there that may not be happy or fulfilled in a job. And maybe they chose a job or career because their parents told them that was what they were supposed to do. Or in school, it was just the natural transition. And I'm all for higher education and school and doing that. However, sometimes people have chosen something that maybe isn't the best match for themselves. And then they wonder, why am I unhappy? Why am I not fulfilled? There's got to be something more. So first and foremost, it's knowing yourself, appreciating yourself, and giving yourself some grace as well, right?
Absolutely. And Stephanie, you said something, and I really kind of want to highlight it because it's really important. A lot of times we define our success or our career path based off of someone else. Mm-hmm. And you were in a corporate role for 25 years, and we were talking, and you shared that you were thinking about like what's next even within that role. Mm-hmm. And so many times we follow just because we think this is what we're supposed to do, but truly success it's individual. It is an individual situation, and we cannot look at another human being and say, oh, well, because Stephanie's version of success means this, then Jen's has to mean this too. It's absolutely individualized, and I think so many times what has happened is we've set a goal based off of other people's ideas of success, or you're supposed to climb the ladder, and then we get there and we get to that executive role and we're like, wait a minute, I didn't sign up for this. This isn't exactly what I want. So when people are finding themselves in that, how do they kind of reinvent themselves, or how do they step back with this awareness? Because you've talked about the first thing is knowing yourself, knowing who you are. But how do they take that meta step back and say, okay, what does success even mean for me? Like, what are a couple of actionable items that people who are watching maybe can take to reassess, like, am I going in the direction I meant to? I've been going in this direction, but it's kind of veering left, and I'm realizing that I want to course correct because it's not where I exactly want to be, whether in business or in a corporate role.
Sure, great question. So as I mentioned, knowing yourself first, but then I think another really important question to ask is, how can I best leverage my talents, my knowledge, my skills and abilities to help others, right? Where can I give the most of what I have to give, my gifts, and we all have them. We all have our natural gifts. Are you using those today? And if the answer is maybe 20% of the time, that's a really good indicator to look for opportunities where you can leverage and align your knowledge, skills, abilities, and talents. And as I mentioned, I had some really candid conversations prior to that layoff over a 6-month period. And I was vulnerable and I was honest with both myself, with the person that I was reporting to, and with the organization on what I felt was not only best for me, but also what was best for the organization. And I think sometimes people are afraid to have those candid, real, raw conversations because they don't want to make waves, right? Or they're afraid, oh, well, if I say that, then, this may go away. And that is true, right? But if you don't take that risk and you're not true to yourself, is it really worth it to stay somewhere where you're not ultimately fulfilled and happy? And I hope the answer that most people would have is no, right? Because you were meant to do something. You were meant to give your gifts to the world. And so having that realization is really important. And being brave is a big part of resiliency. You mentioned in business and entrepreneurship and really life, right? Life is not an easy road. There are bumps in the road. There are hurdles. There are mountains to climb. And we will slide down that mountain and we will fall into the pit sometimes. And I think another thing that's really important, and a lot of what I'm talking about is all related to mindset, is having that mindset that you will fall and you will fail, and that's part of success. And you have to be willing to do that, because if you are not willing to risk, then you're not going to reach your full potential or the milestones that you want to reach.
Absolutely, and I want to dig into this again a little bit more, because you now have switched and transitioned out, and what you do as your core business is leadership training, and one of the real hot topics right now in business is change management and leadership, and empowering our people to be in the right role and on a career path that's right for them. That is a big hot topic right now in a lot of companies. And so now that you've been through this and you've seen this firsthand multiple times in business and life, as many of us have, what could entrepreneurs and executives do to facilitate that psychological safe space where their employees feel safe going to their managers, their leaders, their executives, and saying, hey, look, I thought this was really what I wanted and I'm feeling unfulfilled here. Is there a way for me to address this within in a way that is a win-win both for me and the company? So how are you now, like, what would you tell an entrepreneur and executive who's dealing with this? Because this is a big thing. We talked about quiet quitting, and it is a very big shift in business. So how can we start to think about that or create that psychological safe space where employees can come to us without fear of retribution, which, you know, of course legally, but there's always something there.
Yeah. Well, it is a culture shift, right? So creating a culture of resiliency is huge. And what I mean by that is, as you mentioned, you do have to create that safe space, and it starts at the top and it trickles down. You know, what kind of leader do you want to be? And do you know what your team members think about your leadership style? Have you done team member surveys? Which, the one thing I'll say about team member surveys, though, they're fantastic because you get a lot of feedback. But if you're going to do a team member survey, you have to be willing to take action with that feedback, and at the very least communicate your reaction to feedback. You know, we can't necessarily change 100% of the things that our team members come to us with in terms of ideas or suggestions, but we can use that as a jumping off point to really get a strong pulse on the culture and the morale of the organization. And you know, I talk a lot about leadership statistics, and you've probably heard this, most of us have probably heard this, but people typically don't leave companies, they leave bosses, yes, right? They do. And so that immediate supervisor is the most important influential person in whether or not a team member succeeds or fails, or has loyalty to the company, or is engaged with the organization. So communication is key. Being open-minded, also the leaders being vulnerable, particularly with everything that we've gone through within the world in the last couple of years, but how companies have been impacted. It's really important that leaders feel comfortable with opening up and being vulnerable. So when things are not going well, you know, having a State of the Union address with the organization, and then in small groups to say, you know, we know these 3 things that have happened within our organization have been really tough on everyone, and we want to talk to you about that. You know, how are you feeling? What are your biggest pain points? And give them a little bit of hope, because at the end of the day, team members need 4 things from their leaders, and they need trust, compassion, hope, and they need a vision. And so that should be at the forefront of what we're doing to communicate to our teams within the organization. And then secondly, I'll add to that, in addition to doing something about the feedback, providing a support system and structure. And that can come in a number of different ways. So you can have structured programs, which I think have great value, right? But you can also have informal programs with a little bit of structure, things like mentorship programs and peer coach programs, so that people know where they can go and what their resources are. I help people with onboarding, team members as well, creating onboarding programs. And the 2 most important things that teams need to know, or that people need to know during onboarding, but really at any time, is who to know and where to go, right? So who are those crucial people that I need to be connected with in the organization, and where do I need to go to get what I need? And it sounds simple, but I will tell you, oftentimes when I'm helping organizations navigate change management or working with them on leadership development, you can point back to they don't know their resources. They don't know where to go. They don't know who to go to. They don't know how to do things. And there are broken down lines of communication. So communication, who to know where to go, simple in theory, right? But sometimes difficult to execute, which is why I help people with that.
Absolutely, and execution and implementation of these things is what's really key. And so just to kind of summarize and add on to some of the things that you said, you know, when we are communicating or when we're getting feedback and soliciting feedback, it's important for us to have that safe space that they can give that honest feedback, but we have to respond to that, because if we don't, let's just be real, all human beings have a need to be heard. Like, that is part of the communication process. And so many times, and what I've found as well, Stephanie, and you echoed this, is leaders ask for feedback, but then they don't actually do anything about it. So then what happens the next time you ask for feedback is everybody's like, well, I gave you my feedback and nothing changed. Yeah. And so we have to break that cycle as leaders. And it's been a real shift, because now what we have to do as leaders of our companies, as executives, we have to be transparent with a lot more transparent than what we were accustomed to even 10 years ago, right? It used to be that the C-suite would get together and it would be all hush hush and they'd make decisions, and then all of a sudden things would roll out. Now we have to have those open, transparent conversations. This is the direction that we're heading. This is why we're heading there. And let's be real, the younger generations want to get behind companies that are making an impact beyond just the product or service that we're providing. They want to know they're making an impact in the world. And so if we're, as leaders, not really fully communicating that in a way that they buy into the vision, we've already lost the younger generations at this point in time. So I think it's really, really awesome the points that you brought up, and I think it's also very key that we are transparent with where we're going. If we have a change in the direction of our company, we have to be transparent. This is the vision. This is why the change is happening. It's this vision. This is what we're going to do and how we're going to have an impact, and messaging that in such a way that they can get excited and be a part of that change. So I really love that you brought that to the forefront. If you are listening to this or watching this, be taking notes. Stephanie is dropping pure gold here. And really and truly, that was a whole lot of different things that we could take action on, Stephanie. What is the first thing, if people are about to institute some sort of a change? And let's just take the AI example. AI is hitting the entrepreneurial world and business by storm. We're all integrating it in some way. And so what is the one takeaway, if they're going to message this to their team, that they can be doing that, like the one action they can take today?
Yeah, well, the very first thing to do, the first step is to define the change, right? So the who, what, why, when, where, how. That has to be done, and identifying your key stakeholders, because you do need champions of change who are going to help you make that happen. But defining it is key. So oftentimes I see organizations say, oh my gosh, we need to do that. And you gave AI as an example, but it can't be a shoot, ready, aim approach, right? You really have to think about, okay, what are we doing? Why are we doing it? And how are we going to do this so that it works for us over the long term? So very much a strategic outlook before a change is implemented is key. Because oftentimes, and over 80% of organizations that try to implement change efforts fail. And they fail because they're not following a process. And there is a clearly defined process in any type of change management initiative. So defining it and identifying your key stakeholders, number one priority.
Fantastic. And we do have to take a brief break, but if you're listening to this at home, you know change is happening. It's happening every day. What is the strategy that you're going to implement, and who are the key stakeholders, the customers, the employees, the investors, whatever people that are involved in that change? Put that down on paper, just like Stephanie said, and we'll see you in just a few moments.
Hey, Lily says AT&T's giving everyone their best deals.
Minus the air quotes.
Best deals.
No need to wink. Others say they give everyone a deal, but not everyone gets the best deal.
Told you, the best deals are for everyone here, with a choice of plans.
You were right.
Is she always right?
Always.
At AT&T, we give everyone our best deals on every smartphone.
Are you ready to talk about all things real estate? Hi, I'm Michelle Briggs, the host of Your Person Real Estate. Join me every Thursday at 5 p.m. and discover everything you should know about the real estate world.
You probably already know that first impressions are never forgotten. However, did you also know the way you feel about yourself contributes to your quality of life and the opinions of others? Hi, my name is Kristen Gunderson. My mission is to help people by flipping the switch inside their body, which in turn will help them to feel better and do more. In fact, once you feel your best, you will be able to pour into others, keep your cup full, and reach every goal you have set up for yourself, whether it's personal, family, or business related. The way you feel will dictate the way you think and the way you live your life. Feeling your best is necessary to achieve your goals. You deserve to put yourself first. Let me help you flip the switch so you can feel better and do more. Let's talk. I know I can help.
En esta era digital, las tarjetas de presentación de negocio son cosa del pasado. De hecho, la mayoría de las personas que las reciben las pierden en cuestión de minutos. La videotarjeta de negocios de NowMedia es un video de su negocio especialmente creado por nuestros expertos con toda su información de contacto, los productos y servicios de su negocio, y puede ser enviado de manera rápida utilizando su teléfono móvil. Cientos de negocios ya están viendo la diferencia. Llámenos hoy al 832-384-9588.
¿Estás cansado de la inseguridad, la situación económica y de ya sabes quién? ¿Te gustaría salir de México y emigrar a Estados Unidos? Soy Edmundo Treviño y quiero compartir contigo más de 20 años como inmigrante emprendedor en Estados Unidos. Sígueme en todas mis redes sociales para que juntos logremos ese gran sueño de emigrar y lograr conquistar el mercado americano.
Working with the right attorney at your side. Hi, my name is Sonia Aston, and I'm an attorney with over 30 years of experience. I've helped small and medium-sized businesses and business owners to make sure that their legal rights and interests are protected. As general counsel for you and your organization, I can draft and review solid contracts, minimize the risk of litigation, review and prepare comprehensive business succession plans, or help you navigate your company with the local, state, and federal government. Take a decisive step today. I'm here to make sure your legal rights are protected and you have a peace of mind that you deserve.
Bienvenidos a Interior Bar Houston, el bar más vibrante de Downtown en la ciudad de Houston. En Interior, la fiesta nunca para. Nuestro DJ de clase mundial se mantendrá bailando toda la noche con la mejor música de hoy y de siempre. Además, aquí encontrarás las mejores bebidas y cócteles. En Interior, nuestro ambiente electrizante y nuestro equipo amigable te asegurarán una noche que nunca olvidarás. Te esperamos de 9:30 a 2 de la mañana. Interior, donde la diversión nunca se detiene.
Welcome back to Power CEOs, the truth behind the business. Jen Gaudet here, your fearless host, entrepreneur, investor, and business strategist. And if you are just now tuning in, you're going to want to go to NowMedia.tv, click on the shows portion, and go to see the first segment, because we have Stephanie Puryear Helling here, and she has been talking about resilience, transition. We've been talking about change management and leadership, how to effectively get an engaged employee base, our teams engaged in the changes that we're doing within our organization is so valuable. So go ahead and check that out if you're just tuning in. But we're going to dive right back into the conversation we were having before the break. So Stephanie, before the break, we were talking about the first step to change management. And we're just going to use AI integration as an example because it's real, it's relevant, it's what people are talking about right now. If we're going to implement AI or an AI strategy into our organization and start utilizing the tools, the first step is to know what the change is that we're going to implement and have a vision and a plan, a strategy behind that, and also to identify the key stakeholders. And that's kind of where we left off at the break is identifying that strategy for implementation and for change, and then the key stakeholders. And I want to ask you, and we're going to use this example because this example is so good. There's so much fear. Is AI going to take my job away? Am I going to be competent utilizing the new system? What is the change going to happen from the employee viewpoint? Am I going to lose my job? As we talked about earlier, job security is kind of a myth. So all those fears are happening about particularly artificial intelligence and implementation and integration in business. So once we have the change that we want to implement, we're going to implement AI into our processes. We're going to implement AI into our marketing or what have you. We have a plan, we have a strategy for that implementation, and we've identified our key stakeholders. What are the ways that a good consultant, a consultant such as yourself, could come in and help to guide this process? Because let's be real, a lot of times we're so stuck in our business and we have a perspective, we almost have blinders on about our own businesses and our own teams. So what is the role of a consultant during this change management? And then how do we mitigate some of the fears that are associated with change? Because that's one of the factors of all humanity. We resist change. It's just a fact of our biology. So talk to me a little bit about how a consultant can help manage this transition, bring it through in a smooth factor, ensure that we have a 360-degree perspective instead of just kind of our blinders on.
Sure. Great question, Jen. So yes, there is always a human element, right? So in any type of change management initiative, there's the process side and then there's the people side. And the people side is huge. And oftentimes organizations will focus so much on the process that the people side sometimes unintentionally becomes second nature. And so where a consultant comes in, having someone come in who is certified in change management, right? But can also really take an objective look at the organization, and they don't have any skin in the game, right? So they don't have an emotional attachment to the change like most people in the organization are going to do. And during any type of change process, you've got the people who are deciding on the change. And oftentimes, as you mentioned, they've been talking about it for a long time. And formerly, behind closed doors and not telling anyone. And that still does happen. And so they've got this idea that's been percolating for a while. They've got the core team who's been talking about it.
And they're
ready
excited
to
about
go.
it.
They're so excited. And they don't understand why when they finally launch the communication to the team, people are nervous and they're resistors, right? You will have some champions of change, but you'll have a lot of people who are digging their heels in, right? Or are fearful because they are getting it all at once. And typically what happens in organizations, they launch the communication and then the implementation is happening shortly thereafter. So it's no surprise that people are freaking out, right? And so bringing in a consultant can really help you understand that change cycle. There is a cycle, there is a process, and the change curve, because in all change, no matter how amazing it's going to be for you or your business, there will be fear. People will fall into the pit. You cannot avoid it. And you certainly can't avoid it by telling people, well, just don't go into the pit. I don't know if you follow Brene Brown at all. I love her. But on her podcast, she did a 2-part podcast talking about toxic positivity. And she interviewed Dr. Susan David, thank you, I almost drew a blank, who wrote a book called Emotional Agility. And in that podcast, it's awesome, but they talk about toxic positivity, where oftentimes within organizations or even in personal lives, people are positive in a toxic way, and oftentimes it's not intentional. And that's saying things like, well, just don't worry about it, or, well, just, pull yourself up by the bootstraps, or stop complaining, you're being negative. Just get on board with it. And while they mean well, it actually does the opposite. It has the opposite impact of what they're trying to achieve, because you have not honored or acknowledged and seen where the person is at or where the team is at.
And we have to clear the emotions before we can even expect someone to implement something new. If they're in fear, it doesn't matter. It's almost like we're not validating or meeting them where they are.
100%.
Yeah, and I want to continue on this, because so many times you said it exactly right. We're behind closed doors. We've gotten excited about this. We've chosen the path forward. We've identified all the things we're going to do, and we're ready to implement. And we're not giving that same courtesy to our teams. Our teams need to have time to digest, and some people they will champion it. They'll be able to process it really rapidly, and some people are going to need some time and they're going to need some conversations, and they're going to need a verbal process what's happening so that they can actually move through their emotional process. So when you come into these companies as a consultant, what is like one or two key things that you see across the board when you walk in and there's this kind of disconnect between leadership and they're rightfully so excited about what's coming, and the fear that's happening and that toxic positivity? What are one or two things that you've noticed across the board kind of are easy ways to smooth that over and bring a bridge, like draw the bridge and meet those employees where they are?
Yeah, really conversation. So doing discovery and a needs assessment, really understanding from the executive team's point of view what they're wanting to implement, achieve, why, and by when, right? And then who will be involved in that process and who will be impacted. And then from the team members' perspective, putting together focus groups is great. Having one-on-one interviews, small group interviews, and really talking to them about the potential change and how they feel about it. And oftentimes that step is missed, which is really doing a disservice to the entire organization, because you're talking to the people who are responsible for implementing it and carrying it out and making sure it's successful. So if you don't have their feedback in the beginning, you might be missing some crucial things that are important to acknowledge or work into the new improved process, right? Because things will break, especially technology. I have never seen a technology initiative that has been rolled out without things breaking. It's part of it. So socialization is huge and paramount first and foremost when we're beginning any type of initiative like that.
And you are an expert in this space. How many times do you encounter an executive team or let's just talk about an entrepreneur who maybe is a small business, and they're reluctant to share that discovery process with their team when they're looking at, okay, which system are we going to implement? What are we going to integrate? Because maybe everybody on the team, maybe there's 10 employees and everyone has a different idea. There's a fear at the top. Mm-hmm. If I open it up and nobody comes to a consensus, then what? So how do you as a consultant navigate through those concerns for the entrepreneur or the executive team?
Yeah. Really setting some ground rules that it's okay to have a healthy level of conflict. In fact, you want to encourage a healthy level of conflict. And what I mean by that, conflict is, has a negative connotation. It's used as a bad word. But when we talk about conflict or differences of opinion, that's how we get to the best possible end result, because we've considered all of the angles or the options, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And you do actually need naysayers on your team. You don't need a bunch of yes people. You do need people who are going to pick it apart and give you possible things to consider that maybe you wouldn't have, because you are always future focused and you're not looking at the small details or the intricacies.
Yeah, and I think that's so key. Also, so many times I work with a lot of companies as well, and in the strategic side of things. And what I have found is they surround themselves with leaders, other leaders of their company that are like them.
Yes.
It is by far the biggest mistake that I have seen across the board, small businesses, larger organizations, is putting that board together, and it's an echo chamber. Mm-hmm. And so talk to me a little bit about how can we assess that, because I think this is something that we don't talk about a lot on the show. How can we assess, do I have an echo chamber in my executive team or in my key leaders that I'm bouncing these ideas or bringing this to the table? And if I do have an echo chamber where everybody's like a little mini me, if you will, how do I introduce the diversity that I need so that I can get those people who are going to poke holes in ideas? Because failure happens when we don't poke holes in ideas and we just have that optimistic always attitude. So talk to me about that and how we can identify, is that us?
Yeah. Awesome question. So I mentioned assessments earlier, and I'm assessment geek. I love them. But not only do I use assessments with clients so they can identify self and strengths, but I also use those with teams. So I'm a certified DISC consultant and a strengths finder coach and consultant. And I like to leverage both of those because they really not only help us identify individual strengths and opportunities to leverage those strengths within the organization, but do we have the right people on the bus, at the table, on the team that is a well-balanced team? And many of us were taught growing up, oh, well, you need to be a well-rounded person and you need to fix the things that you don't do well to be better at them. And there is some value in that, right? However, studies have shown that statistically, if we take our strengths and focus on making those better, we will exponentially be more successful. And so being a well-rounded person, the way that we've been taught, is not necessarily what we need to strive to do, but we do need to have well-rounded teams. So for example, I'll just give a quick example here. When I'm using StrengthsFinder within an organization, there are 34 strengths, and we typically identify the top 5 for each team member. But those strengths fall into 4 leadership domains, which are executing, influencing, relationship building, and strategic thinking. And oftentimes, as you mentioned, people will have people like them on the team where they've got a team of strategic thinkers who are phenomenal strategic thinkers, but they have no executors, or they have no relationship builders, or they have no influencers. And so then it's no surprise that certain things aren't getting done. So that can be a really eye-opening experience for leadership teams, so that they have an opportunity to introduce people with a different set of strengths and domains into that function, that team, or that process.
Yeah, and I want to really highlight this, because if we don't know who we have on the bus, like knowing who we have on the bus and what their strengths are and where they excel and shine, that's only one part of the equation. We also need to have the people on the bus. If we have the right people on the bus, are they in the right seat?
Yeah.
Because when we know who our team strengths are, where they are, we can form those. We can make sure they're in the right seat, so that the team is actually, better than the sum of all of its parts. And I think as executives and as entrepreneurs, that is what our key role is as the leader and founder of the company. Do I have the right teams at the table? Do I have the right executive team at the table, the right leaders that are going to be well-rounded, and that team should be stronger than the sum of each of the individuals who make up that team. I think it's such an incredible and how many times do you see that it's passed over?
Yeah.
It's kind of like we blow by the seat of our pants and we grow, and we focus on like the financial metrics. But in order for us to truly build a solid business and to grow with a fundamentally strong company and hit that scale, it's not just about the financials, it's also about the people and the processes. And the people is, especially
huge.
Right now, it's the most important thing.
Absolutely.
Because when we think, and I know you're also very, very good at the customer experience. You did that in the real estate, you work with that now with other companies. if we are not giving that experience to our employees, how can we expect them to have an ideal customer experience,
100%.
or client experience?
Absolutely. There is a direct correlation between company culture, employee engagement and retention, and loyalty to the company, and the customer experience and how loyal our customers are. It is all interconnected, right, as part of that people and process piece.
So I'm going to ask you another question from kind of a different perspective.
Sure.
If people are watching this and they're like, I don't know if I have a problem. I think I've got this handled. I'm not quite sure. If they're like on the fence, what are some key things that they might be seeing, like some symptoms in their business that they might be seeing that is actually a leadership situation where they need to bring in a consultant such as yourself?
Sure. Well, I think when you were hearing things through the grapevine, right, which often happens within an organization, and you're hearing things trickle to you that weren't discussed in team meetings, that's a big indicator that you need to look at changing your environment. Because for whatever reason, people don't feel safe talking about it in the meeting, which is where it's supposed to happen, right? Mm-hmm. So we're either having in-person meetings or we're having Zoom meetings, yet other conversations, which sometimes can point to the real issues, are happening outside of that meeting. That's a huge indicator. Another thing would be, people being engaged or not, whether or not they show up late to meetings, to Zoom calls, to training sessions, phone calls, whatever the case may be, or when they're in them, they're disengaged, they're on their phone, they have excuses for why they can't be there, they're distracted. That's a problem, right? So are your meetings effective? Do you have an agenda? And does everyone feel like there's going to be a positive outcome that's going to benefit them and the organization in those meetings? So communication, in a nutshell, is a big indicator that there is a larger problem that needs to be identified.
And a lot of times you'll hear the whispers before you see the turnover, the employee turnover.
Yes.
And so for a smaller business, what does this look like? For a smaller business that maybe doesn't have a whole lot of employees, they really do have a good tight team and people want to be engaged. Like, what do you see? Because a lot of times in corporate, that's exactly the same thing. But sometimes in small business, it looks a little bit different. So for the small business owner with, say, fewer than 10 employees, what is the symptom that they're going to see first?
I think oftentimes in small businesses, you can look at the interactions that are occurring with clients and customers and how happy they are. That's a really big indicator, because in a small business, you have people wearing multiple hats, right, to try to get things done. And so if you find that your customers or clients are unhappy, with whether it's the end product or the service, or they're calling constantly, there's a need that's not being met, right? And so that's a great indicator of what can we do to streamline this process. And in a small organization, perhaps you can't hire anyone else right now, but do you have the right people focusing on the right things? And looking at trends as well. What are the things that are not getting done or that seem to be pain points over and over and over? That's where you should focus to be solution oriented. What do we need to do? Is it changing a person's role? Is it changing a process? Can we leverage a third party to help us with this?
And so many times too in small business, there's a lot of things that need to be addressed. Can we identify, is this the needle mover? What is the biggest root cause problem that we can move forward? And what I have found is that's where the consultant really comes in very powerfully, is when we're not really sure where to start, or when we have a lot of things we want to fix, but we can't fix them all at once because we have a tighter budget perhaps.
Yeah.
That outside perspective is invaluable, because they can shine the light and they can say, well, all of these things, here's the root cause, or if we do this, if we address this first, it's going to move the needle this much, and then it makes everything else after it a little bit more simple to kind of work through. So
Absolutely.
I think that was absolutely solid and sage advice. And so Stephanie, if people are out here listening and they're like, holy cow, that's a lot. We've talked about culture, we've talked about resilience, we've talked about change management, we've talked about fear and mindset and how to communicate things. It's been a lot to unpack. If they are a small business owner, what is the one action based off of everything we discussed today that you say, you know what, if you're going to do something today, this is the one thing that will move the needle for you, for a small business owner?
Call me. Yeah. The one thing that you need to do is look at your people, right? Do you have the right people in place, the right seats on the bus? Is everyone engaged? And that's going to require you having some really candid conversations with each person. I would suggest that you certainly can have a team meeting, but doing that one-on-one team approach and really getting a pulse on how they're doing is probably the most important thing that you can do for a small organization, because you do want the right people. You've got a small team, you're lean. You need to make sure that everyone is 100% in to whatever it is that your mission is, so that you can move forward.
And engaged.
Yes.
In and engaged.
Yes.
And excited about the vision.
Yes.
And so now let's take it to a larger company that maybe has a little bit more team members, has more budget or whatnot. What is the one thing based off of everything we discussed today that you would say, hey, this is your first step. Let's start the momentum?
Yeah. I would probably give the same answer, honestly. How is everyone feeling within your organization? You probably have a pretty good idea of what that looks like already. In a larger organization, you can leverage HR system statistics, right? And look at things like your turnover, look at your performance metrics in terms of team member performance reviews, look at your net promoter score for the customer experience and whether or not they're happy. I would look at that report card first and foremost, if you have one, to look at those key performance indicators where perhaps you're not moving the needle or it's going down and it's been a continuous struggle over time.
I hear it. Look at your metrics. I love that you said that. That is one of my big talking points as well. Look at your metrics, look at the data, know what's happening, know your trends. I think it's more about trends than anything when it comes to people. Are we trending down? Are we trending solid? Are we trending up? What does that look like? And so, Stephanie, if people are listening to this and they're like, that was amazing, I want to learn more about you. I know that it's on the screen for those watching, but for those who are listening, maybe in radio or podcast format, how can they reach out to you if they want to get in touch with you, maybe ask you more questions about leadership, change management, resiliency? How can they reach out to you?
Sure. My website is www.leadingpeopleandteamstosuccess.com. I would absolutely welcome a conversation with you to talk about where you are, what challenges you're facing, and how I can help you overcome those hurdles and challenges to achieve greater success for you and your team.
And a little birdie told me there might be a book coming on resiliency. You want to drop that bomb right here?
Yeah. So I have been through a lot of changes, I shared with you. In addition to a layoff, I was divorced after 21 years, laid off after 21 years. My oldest son had cancer. My little sister passed away and left behind a 1-year-old baby. My middle son, had some anxiety due to some of those things. So it's been a lot, in a 6-year period. But I'm passionate about resilience, and it's so important that we build our own resiliency skills, and I want to help others do that. So I am developing a course on how to strengthen your resiliency muscle, and I'm also writing a book, 21 Ways to Strengthen Your Resiliency Muscle. And so I plan on launching in the fall. And I'd love to talk to you more about it, but stay tuned for that.
Yep, so be watching. Definitely follow Stephanie on all her socials. She is active on them. Reach out to her website and follow her, because that book, I'm sure, is going to be chock full of all kinds of amazing tips for resiliency, building that resiliency muscle, which is a key component to entrepreneurship and truly, being the CEO of your business and your life.
Absolutely. And life, right?
100%. So Stephanie, it has been so incredibly amazing. I have one last question for you today.
Sure.
If you could go back to, 20 years ago, or maybe go back to the version of you who was just launching in her entrepreneurial career, is there anything you would do differently?
I would hire a coach more quickly than I did. You and I have a business coach in common who has been instrumental in my success. I have a handful of other coaches. I would have made the decision to hire a coach right away because having a coach has helped me to identify my blind spots, right, which I didn't know were there, and being able to do things quicker, faster, more efficiently, and most importantly, leaving the corporate world, I had a huge, broad network of team members, right, and also in the industry that I was in, and I'm still connected with those people, but I'm not working with them on a daily basis. So through working with a few coaches, I have also developed this incredible network, including you, Jen, and that is key because when we're looking at change, resiliency, one thing that I didn't mention that is paramount is having a support system around you that can help you navigate what's happening. So I would have done that faster.
I love it. And when we talk about coaches, I have 7 myself. I'm a big proponent for that. And a lot of people are like, well, you are this and you do this and you have coaches. Well, yes, absolutely. I would be very wary of hiring any coach or consultant who didn't have their own mentors, coaches and consultants, because that is how we grow. We grow from that outside perspective and from the people who have paved the way for us. So thank you so much for all of your insights. I really appreciate you having you here today. It has been a total pleasure. And now I'm going to speak to our amazing audience. Yes, you. Stephanie gave us several potential action steps that you can take today, because it's one thing to listen to the content, to hear the things that we're talking about. It's a whole other ball game for us to implement, and actually that's where the magic happens. So I encourage you to take action on one thing you heard today, whether it's building your resiliency muscle, whether it's doing a scorecard of, do I have the right people on the bus in my organization? Wherever it is that can start your progress, pick that one action step and implement it today. Not tomorrow, not next week, but today. Because when we implement, that's when we change our daily habits, our daily behaviors, and that's how we create the momentum that's going to grow our businesses. And of course, as our businesses grow, it impacts everything from our teams, our families, and our communities, and our world. So take action today. Unfortunately, all good things do come to an end, including this show. But the good news is we'll be back same time, same station next week. I can't wait to see you. Go win today, win this week, and we'll see you next time.
This has been a NowMedia Television feature presentation. All rights reserved.
¿Quieres que tu negocio crezca y todo parece indicar que el camino es Estados Unidos? Te dijeron que abras una LLC para que no pagues impuestos, mas no tienes idea de cómo hacerlo. Soy Edmundo Treviño y quiero compartir contigo más de 20 años como empresario en Estados Unidos para que tú no te equivoques en los mismos errores que yo ya realicé. Sígueme en todas las redes sociales para que juntos conquistemos el mercado americano.
Oye, Lily dice que AT&T le da a todos las mejores ofertas.
Minus the air quotes.
Las mejores ofertas.
No need to wink. Others say they give everyone a deal, but not everyone gets the best deal.
Te lo dije, aquí las mejores ofertas son para todos con una variedad de planes.
You were right.
Is she always right?
Always.
En AT&T les damos a todos nuestras mejores ofertas en cada smartphone.
En esta era digital, las tarjetas de presentación de negocio son cosa del pasado. De hecho, la mayoría de las personas que las reciben las pierden en cuestión de minutos. La videotarjeta de negocios de NowMedia es un video de su negocio especialmente creado por nuestros expertos con toda su información de contacto, los productos y servicios de su negocio, y puede ser enviado de manera rápida utilizando su teléfono móvil. Cientos de negocios ya están viendo la diferencia. Llámenos hoy al 832-384-9588.
Hey, this is Michael Rager, the host of Biz Talk TV with Michael Rager. Make sure you join us every day, 5 p.m. Central Time on all NowMedia channels and social media platforms.
¿Sueñas con vender tus productos o servicios en Estados Unidos? Pareciera muy difícil, mas no es imposible. Soy Edmundo Treviño y quiero compartir contigo más de 20 años de experiencia promoviendo productos latinoamericanos en el principal mercado del mundo. Si quieres aprender más, sígueme en todas mis redes sociales.
Broadcasting live from Houston, from the space city to the world. You are watching NowMedia Television.